Imagine walking into a room where everyone holds their breath. Not from fear, not from awe, but from disgust. Two beings sit alone in the corner, their very presence causing others to flee. Their crime? Simply existing while smelling different. But what if that smell held the key to saving an entire galaxy? What if the thing that made everyone run away was actually humanity's greatest gift to the universe? This is the story of how one human's curiosity turned two outcasts into heroes, and how the worst smell in known space became the sweetest scent of hope. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't what you'd expect, and sometimes being human means seeing past what everyone else runs from. Get ready for a journey that will make you question everything you thought you knew about prejudice, courage, and what it truly means to be different in a universe that demands conformity. The observation deck of Nexus Station buzzed with the usual mix of species from across the galaxy. Crystalline Zephyrians clinked softly as they moved, their translucent bodies catching the starlight. Furry Corellans chattered in their musical language while massive Threnodidae stomped past on their 6 legs. It was a typical day in the most diverse space station in known space, where beings from thousands of worlds came to trade, learn, and coexist. Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her face against the viewing port, watching a Galactic Council transport ship dock at Base 7. She had been waiting 3 months for this moment. As the lead xenobiologist for the Human Research Initiative, she specialized in studying species that others found difficult to understand. Her colleagues often joked that she had a talent for finding beauty in the strangest places. The airlock hissed open, and delegation after delegation emerged. The Corellans bounced out first, their enthusiasm infectious as always. Behind them came the dignified Eridani, their silver robes flowing like liquid mercury. Sarah checked her tablet, scrolling through the list of expected arrivals. Everything seemed normal until she noticed something odd. 2 names on the manifest stood alone, separated from all other entries by significant spacing. Keth and Vera Centauri, from the planet Aromia Prime. Their species designation was listed simply as aromatic humanoids, which told Sarah almost nothing useful. What struck her as strange was the complete absence of any escort or diplomatic attachments. Every other species had come with advisors, translators, or cultural liaisons. These 2 had come entirely alone. A commotion near the docking bay caught her attention. She watched as beings who had been chatting pleasantly suddenly began backing away from the airlock. The retreat started slowly, almost politely, but quickly accelerated into something resembling panic. Even the normally unflappable Eridani lifted their robes and glided backward with unusual haste. Then, Sarah caught the first hint of what was causing the exodus. A smell unlike anything she had ever experienced wafted through the station's ventilation system. It was not simply unpleasant, it was aggressively offensive. Her nose wrinkled involuntarily, and her eyes began to water. The scent seemed to attack every sense at once, creating an almost physical wall of revulsion. Through the crowd of fleeing beings, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the source. 2 figures emerged from the docking bay, walking with careful dignity despite the chaos their presence created. They stood roughly human height, with elongated limbs and graceful movements. Their skin appeared to shift between pale green and soft purple, like aurora lights playing across their bodies. What should have been a beautiful sight was completely overshadowed by the overwhelming stench that surrounded them. The male, who Sarah assumed was Keth, wore what appeared to be formal diplomatic robes in deep blue. Despite his regal bearing, every step he took caused nearby beings to stumble backward, covering their breathing apparatus or nasal openings. His companion, presumably Vera, moved with equal grace in robes of silver and gold. Her posture suggested someone accustomed to rejection, but determined to maintain dignity regardless. Station security appeared almost immediately, but even they struggled to approach the pair. Sarah watched as a Corellan security officer attempted to escort them, only to retreat after mere seconds of proximity. The officer's fur actually stood on end, and he made distressed clicking sounds that Sarah had never heard from his species before. What fascinated Sarah most was not the smell itself, but the reaction it provoked. She had studied enough species to know that scent could be a powerful form of communication. Many beings used pheromones, chemical markers, or aromatic signatures for everything from identification to emotional expression. The fact that this particular scent caused such universal revulsion suggested something far more complex than simple bad odors. She also noticed something else that others seemed to miss. While every other species fled in apparent distress, the twins themselves showed no signs of discomfort. They breathed normally, moved gracefully, and maintained calm expressions despite the chaos surrounding them. This suggested they were either immune to their own scent or that the odor was not actually harmful, just incredibly unpleasant to non-sensory senses. The crowd had now completely cleared the main concourse. Station announcements began broadcasting in multiple languages, politely requesting all beings to avoid the central areas while atmospheric adjustments were made. Sarah realized that the aromatic humanoids were being quarantined, not for their safety, but for everyone else's comfort. She made a decision that would later prove to change everything. Instead of fleeing like everyone else, Dr. Sarah Chun walked directly toward the source of the galaxy's most offensive smell. Her first few steps were manageable. The scent was present, but not overwhelming at a distance. As she drew closer, however, the smell intensified exponentially. Her eyes streamed tears, her throat burned, and every instinct screamed at her to retreat. The odor was unlike anything in her experience. Part rotting vegetation, part chemical burn, part something so alien that her brain struggled to categorize it. But Sarah had not become a xenobiologist by following her comfort zones. She had spent years studying creatures that others found disgusting, dangerous, or disturbing. She had learned to push past instinctive revulsion to discover the beauty and purpose in even the most challenging life forms. By the time she was within 20 feet of the twins, the smell had become a living thing. It seemed to press against her skin, invade her thoughts, and make her stomach lurch with every breath. She was forced to stop and compose herself, fighting the overwhelming urge to vomit. The biological response was so intense that she wondered if the scent might actually be some form of defensive mechanism. That was when she noticed something remarkable. Despite the intensity of her physical reaction, she felt no actual fear or aggression toward the twins themselves. The smell was horrific, but it did not trigger her fight-or-flight response in the way that actual danger would. Her scientific mind began to work through the implications. This suggested that whatever was causing the odor was not actually threatening. It was simply incompatible with non-sensory biology. Keth and Vera had stopped walking and were now standing perfectly still in the center of the empty concourse. They appeared to be waiting, though for what, Sarah could not guess. Their body language suggested resignation rather than surprise. This was clearly not the first time their presence had cleared a room. Sarah forced herself to take another step forward. The smell intensified to the point where she had to cover her nose and mouth with her sleeve just to breathe. She was now close enough to see the details of their appearance, and what she observed fascinated her even more. Their skin was not simply changing colors. It was actually producing a visible aura. Tiny particles seemed to shimmer around their bodies, creating an almost magical effect. The aurora-like shifts in their skin tone followed patterns that suggested some form of complex biological process. Sarah realized she might be witnessing something unprecedented in galactic science. The twins had noticed her approach. Where she might have expected alarm or defensive postures, she saw something entirely different. Both Keth and Vera turned toward her with expressions of complete astonishment. Their large, dark eyes widened in apparent disbelief. They exchanged rapid words in a language that sounded like musical chimes, but their tone suggested urgent discussion. Sarah managed one more step before she was forced to stop completely. The smell had reached a level that made further advance impossible without protective equipment. Her vision was blurring from the tears streaming down her face, and her stomach was cramping from the effort not to be sick. But she had accomplished something significant. She had gotten closer to the Centauri twins than any other being on the station. More importantly, she had observed something that no one else had bothered to notice. Despite the overwhelming scent, despite the universal revulsion they inspired, Keth and Vera were not monsters or threats. They were simply two individuals trying to exist in a galaxy that could not tolerate their presence. From her position 20 feet away, Sarah called out in Standard Galactic, the universal translator language used throughout known space. Hello, I am Dr. Sarah Chun, xenobiologist with the Human Research Initiative. Welcome to Nexus Station. The effect of her words was immediate and profound. Both twins straightened as if struck by lightning. Vera actually gasped, a sound that carried clearly across the empty space between them. They looked at each other, then back at her, then at each other again. Sarah had the distinct impression that they were confirming with each other that what they were experiencing was real. Keth stepped forward slightly and replied in heavily accented but clear Standard Galactic. You speak to us directly? Without protective barriers or mechanical intermediaries. The question revealed everything Sarah needed to know about their usual reception. These were beings who had grown accustomed to being addressed through technology, from safe distances, by representatives who could not bear to be in their presence. Her simple act of direct communication was apparently unprecedented. Yes, Sarah replied, though speaking was difficult due to the burning in her throat. I study species that others find challenging. Your people intrigue me scientifically. Vera spoke for the first time, her voice carrying notes of wonder and disbelief. In all our travels, in all our diplomatic missions, no one has ever simply walked toward us and introduced themselves. Sarah realized she had stumbled onto something far more significant than she had initially understood. These were not just aliens with an unfortunate smell. They were ambassadors of their species, traveling the galaxy on diplomatic missions while being universally rejected and avoided. The implications for their people, their planet, and their place in galactic society were staggering. She also realized something else. Despite the overwhelming physical discomfort, despite every biological instinct telling her to flee, she found herself genuinely curious about these beings. Their grace, their dignity in the face of rejection, their apparent surprise at simple courtesy. All of it suggested depths that no one had bothered to explore. The concourse remained empty except for the three of them. Station security maintained their distance, and other travelers had found alternate routes to avoid the area entirely. Sarah, Keth, and Vera stood in their bubble of mutual isolation, connected by nothing more than the radical concept that communication might be possible despite overwhelming sensory challenges. I would like to learn more about your people. Sarah manned 3 hours later. Sarah sat in Laboratory 7 wearing a state-of-the-art atmospheric suit. The lab had been hastily modified with enhanced ventilation systems and emergency atmosphere controls. Through the reinforced viewing window, she could see Keth and Vera sitting on specially installed chairs, looking remarkably like patients waiting for a doctor's appointment rather than diplomatic ambassadors. The transformation in their demeanor had been striking. When station security had initially suggested the laboratory meeting, both twins had assumed it meant another round of tests and examinations conducted from behind protective barriers. When Sarah explained that she wanted to have an actual conversation, their surprise had given way to something approaching excitement. Dr. Marcus Webb, Sarah's research partner, stood beside her making final adjustments to the recording equipment. I still think you're completely insane, he muttered through his own suit's communication system. In 30 years of xenobiology, I've never encountered anything that provoked such universal revulsion. Every species on the station fled, Sarah. Every single one. That's exactly why this is interesting, Sarah replied, checking her suit's air filtration one more time. Universal reactions usually indicate something significant from an evolutionary or biological standpoint. We're not looking at random unpleasantness here. We're looking at something that triggers deep-seated survival responses across species lines. She activated the laboratory's communication system. Keth, Vera, can you hear me clearly? Vera's voice came through the speakers with remarkable clarity. Yes, Dr. Chun. We can hear you perfectly. We must say, this is by far the most sophisticated setup anyone has ever created for speaking with us. Usually, we are fortunate if others are willing to communicate through text messages from the next room. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for what their lives must be like. Before we begin, I want you to understand that this is not an examination or interrogation. I'm hoping this can be a conversation between colleagues. You're both clearly educated and well-traveled. I'd like to know about your people, your planet, and your experiences in galactic society. Keth leaned forward slightly, his aurora-like skin shifting to deeper purples and blues. Dr. Chun, may we ask you something first? What is it about your species that allows you to tolerate our presence? We have met thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, and none have ever been able to remain in proximity to us for extended periods. It was an excellent question, and one Sarah had been wondering about herself. Humans have a more limited sense of smell compared to many species. We also have a tendency to push through physical discomfort when our curiosity is engaged. But, honestly, I'm not sure why I'm able to adapt when others cannot. That's part of what I hope we can figure out together. Marcus activated a secondary recording system. From a scientific standpoint, I'm reading chemical signatures from your guests that are unlike anything in our databases. The compounds their bodies are producing are incredibly complex, almost like a constantly shifting perfume made up of thousands of different elements. Perfume, Vera repeated softly. An interesting choice of words, Dr. Webb. Your translation systems may be more accurate than you realize. Sarah's interest sharpened immediately. What do you mean by that? Keth and Vera exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Keth began to speak. Dr. Chun, Dr. Webb, what we are about to share with you has never been disclosed to any non-Centauri beings. Our people have learned to keep our secrets, because the truth has never been well received. We're listening, Sarah said simply. Vera stood and began to pace slowly, her movements causing the shimmer around her body to shift and flow. The scent that our bodies produce is not a byproduct of our biology, it is our biology. What you perceive as smell is actually how we communicate, express emotion, share information, and connect with each other. We are constantly broadcasting our thoughts, feelings, and experiences through chemical signals, Keth continued. When you smell us, you are literally experiencing our emotions, our memories, our concerns, and our hopes. The overwhelming nature of the scent is because you are receiving the unfiltered consciousness of two individuals simultaneously. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. You're saying that what we perceive as an odor is actually a form of telepathic communication? Not telepathic exactly, Vera corrected. Chemical, aromatic. But, yes, you are essentially experiencing our thoughts and feelings translated through your olfactory senses. The problem is that non-Centauri minds are not equipped to process this information. Instead of understanding our communications, you experience them as overwhelming sensory assault. Marcus was rapidly taking notes. That would explain the universal negative reaction. Every species we know has some form of chemical sensitivity, even if they don't primarily communicate through scent. You're accidentally forcing a form of forced empathy on everyone you encounter. Forced empathy, Keth repeated thoughtfully. Yes, that is perhaps the most accurate description anyone has ever given. We cannot turn off our communication any more than you can stop speaking. Every emotion we feel, every thought we think, every memory we carry is constantly being broadcast to anyone with chemical receptors. Sarah was beginning to understand the true scope of their isolation. So when you feel sad about being rejected, everyone around you literally smells your sadness, which makes them more uncomfortable, which makes you sadder, which intensifies the scent, creating a feedback loop that makes coexistence nearly impossible, Vera finished. Yes, Dr. Chun, you understand perfectly. We are trapped in a cycle where our natural response to rejection makes us even more rejectable. The laboratory fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah was looking at two beings who were essentially broadcasting their inner lives to a galaxy that experienced their deepest emotions as physical assault. The loneliness they must feel was beyond comprehension. How do your people survive? Marcus asked gently. How do you build relationships or communities when this is how you communicate? Keth's skin shifted to warmer tones, golds, and soft oranges that seemed to pulse with gentle light. On our world, among our own people, this is the most beautiful and intimate form of connection imaginable. We can share joy so pure that it makes flowers bloom. We can comfort each other with love so deep that it heals both physical and emotional pain. When two Centauri fall in love, their combined scent can create aromatic symphonies that last for days. But the moment we leave our world, Vera added, her colors shifting to cooler blues and silvers, We become walking sources of misery for everyone we encounter. We have tried dampening fields, sent neutralizers, even surgical alterations, but nothing works. Our communication is too fundamental to who we are. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had learned. Then, she asked the question that had been building in her mind. Why do you keep trying? Why do you continue to travel and attempt diplomatic contact when the cost is so high? The twins exchanged their longest look yet, and Sarah could see the depth of communication passing between them. Finally, Keth spoke, his voice heavy with emotion that Sarah could now understand was literally filling the room around them. Because our planet is dying, Dr. Chun. Our sun is entering its final phases, and we have perhaps 50 standard years before our world becomes uninhabitable. We need to find a new home, or establish colonies, or arrange for evacuation. We need the help of the galactic community to save our people. But no one will listen long enough for us to explain our situation, Vera continued. We have been traveling for 3 years, visiting every major diplomatic center, every coalition meeting, every trade summit. We present our credentials, we attempt to state our case, and within minutes we are alone in empty rooms while officials discuss us from safe distances. The weight of their situation settled over the laboratory like a heavy blanket. An entire species facing extinction, and their representatives could not even remain in the same room as potential allies long enough to ask for help. It was a tragedy of cosmic proportions. The Galactic Council scheduled this meeting as a courtesy, Keth explained. We are to present our formal request for assistance tomorrow morning. We will stand before the assembled representatives and speak to a room that will almost certainly be evacuated before we finish our opening statement. Sarah's scientific mind was already working on possibilities, but she also felt something more personal, a growing anger at the injustice of their situation. Has anyone ever actually listened to your full request? Has any government or organization heard your complete case? No, Vera said simply. In 3 years of trying, no being has ever remained in our presence long enough to hear our full story. You, Dr. Chun, are the first to ask questions and wait for answers. You and Dr. Webb are the first to treat us as individuals rather than as a problem to be managed from a distance. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. This is insane. An entire species faces extinction, and galactic society can't get past an odor long enough to help them. There has to be something we can do. We've tried everything we can think of, Keth said, though his tone suggested a flicker of hope. Translation devices, mechanical intermediaries, written communications, holographic projections. Nothing preserves the nuance and emotion necessary for effective diplomacy. Our people communicate through sharing feelings, not just facts. When we're forced to use only words, we lose the very essence of what makes us who we are. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, thinking. The problem seemed insurmountable, but her instincts told her there had to be a solution. Humans had built a reputation in galactic society for finding unexpected answers to impossible problems. They were the species that had mediated the Silicon Wars by discovering that both sides were actually the same species in different phases of their life cycle. They were the ones who had solved the quantum entanglement crisis by using children's toys to stabilize interdimensional communications. What exactly happens tomorrow at the council meeting? She asked. We present our case for evacuation assistance, Vera explained. We have 47 minutes allocated to explain our situation, present our scientific data, and formally request aid. The session is being broadcast throughout the galaxy as an example of council inclusiveness and diplomatic progress. 47 minutes to save your entire species, Marcus said quietly. And you'll be doing it to an empty room. The Galactic Council chamber was the most magnificent room Sarah had ever seen. Representatives from over 300 species sat in carefully arranged sections designed to accommodate everything from gas-breathing ethereals to the massive stone-like megalithics. The chamber's architecture was a masterpiece of inclusive design, with multiple atmospheric zones, varied gravitational fields, and sensory accommodations for beings whose perceptions ranged across spectrums humans couldn't even detect. Sarah stood in the preparation area wearing a specially modified atmospheric suit that Dr. Webb had worked on through the night. Instead of full environmental isolation, The suit allowed limited atmospheric exchange while filtering the most overwhelming components of the Centauri chemical communications. It was an unprecedented piece of technology designed specifically to enable extended contact with Keth and Vera. The filtration system should reduce the intensity by about 60%, Marcus explained through her comm system. You'll still experience their emotional broadcasts, but hopefully at a level that won't cause complete sensory overload. The real question is whether you can learn to interpret their chemical language well enough to serve as a translator. Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on the twins standing beside her. Over the past 12 hours, she had spent more consecutive time in their presence than any non-Centauri being in recorded history. The experience had been transformative in ways she was still trying to understand. What she had discovered was that the overwhelming nature of their scent was only the first layer of an incredibly complex communication system. With time and concentration, she had begun to distinguish different emotional signatures within their chemical broadcasts. Keth's anxiety about the upcoming presentation carried notes of sharp citrus and burning metal, while Vera's determined hopes smelled like summer rain mixed with something indefinably warm and golden. More remarkably, Sarah was beginning to realize that she could influence their emotional states through her own responses. When she remained calm despite the sensory assault, their anxiety decreased, which made their scent less aggressive, which made it easier for her to stay calm. She was learning to participate in their feedback loops rather than simply enduring them. Dr. Chun, Vera said softly, we cannot adequately express what your willingness to do this means to our people. In our entire diplomatic history, no being has ever stood beside us before the galactic community. Save your thanks until we see if this actually works, Sarah replied, though she was touched by the genuine gratitude in Vera's voice and the sweet, floral scent that accompanied it. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing here. Keth's skin was cycling through deep purples and blues, patterns Sarah was learning to recognize as intense concentration. Dr. Chun, we have been thinking about what you said yesterday, about humans being uniquely suited to help our people. We believe there may be more truth to that statement than you realize. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, a council aide approached their group. The Corellan official stopped a respectful distance away and spoke through a mechanical translator. The council is ready for your presentation. You have been allocated 47 minutes, as requested. Please be aware that emergency atmospheric controls are standing by in case of unforeseen complications. Sarah understood the subtext. The council was prepared for mass evacuation if the situation became unbearable. She wondered how many beings would actually remain in the chamber long enough to hear what the Centauri had to say. They walked together toward the main platform, and Sarah immediately noticed the reaction their approach created. A wave of movement swept through the assembled representatives as beings caught their first hint of the twins' presence. Unlike the panicked exodus at the station, however, the council members remained in their seats, though many activated personal atmospheric shields or breathing apparatus. The platform itself was positioned in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the rising tiers of delegate seating. As they climbed the steps, Sarah could see representatives throughout the room beginning to react to the intensifying scent. Some were clearly struggling to maintain their positions, while others seemed merely uncomfortable. A few species appeared to be completely unaffected, though they were in the minority. Keth stepped to the primary speaking position, his formal robes now shimmering with the same aurora patterns as his skin. Vera took her place at his side, while Sarah positioned herself slightly behind and between them. She activated her suit's recording systems and opened a direct channel to the Council's translation network. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, Keth began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's amplification system. I am Keth Centauri, and this is my sister Vera. We come before you today as ambassadors of our people, seeking aid in the face of our planet's imminent destruction. Sarah watched as roughly a quarter of the representatives in the lower tiers activated emergency breathing systems. The smell was indeed intense, but her modified suit was working better than expected. More importantly, she was beginning to understand the emotional undertones of Keth's presentation. Beneath his formal words, his chemical signature was broadcasting profound desperation mixed with fragile hope. The scent told a story of a people who had exhausted almost every option, who were facing extinction, but who had not yet given up. Sarah realized that the council was receiving far more information than just Keth's spoken words. They were experiencing his emotions directly, whether they understood it or not. Our sun enters its red giant phase in approximately 50 standard years, Keth continued. Our atmospheric scientists project complete planetary uninhabitability within that time frame. We have come to request assistance in evacuating our population or establishing colony worlds where our people can survive. A murmur went through the chamber, though Sarah noticed it was not just in response to the words. Many representatives were shifting uncomfortably, and she realized they were unconsciously responding to the waves of emotion accompanying Keth's presentation. They were feeling his people's desperation whether they wanted to or not. Vera stepped forward to present their scientific data, and immediately the emotional tenor of the room shifted. Where Keth's emotions had been heavy with desperation, Vera's chemical signature carried something entirely different. A fierce protective love for her people combined with unwavering determination. Sarah found herself deeply moved by the intensity of feeling that accompanied the dry recitation of astronomical data. Our planet houses approximately 800 million Centauri, Vera explained. We have developed preliminary evacuation plans, but we lack the resources for interstellar transportation on the required scale. We also need assistance in identifying suitable colony worlds where our people can establish new communities. Sarah began to notice something remarkable happening in the chamber. While many representatives were clearly uncomfortable, very few had actually left. More surprisingly, some seemed to be leaning forward, apparently becoming more engaged rather than less as the presentation continued. She realized that something unprecedented was occurring. The council was experiencing authentic, unfiltered emotion from another species. There were no diplomatic facades, no carefully crafted presentations designed to minimize discomfort. The Centauri were involuntarily sharing their genuine feelings about their situation, and the effect was powerful beyond anything traditional diplomacy could achieve. That was when Sarah understood her real role in this presentation. Honored council members, she said, stepping forward and activating her translator link. I am Dr. Sarah Chun, xenobiologist with the Human Research Initiative. I want to explain something that may help you understand what you are experiencing right now. A hush fell over the chamber. Sarah realized that many representatives had never seen a human work in direct partnership with a species that others found intolerable. Her presence here was as unprecedented as the Centauri presentation itself. The question period following the Centauri presentation was unlike anything in Galactic Council history. Instead of the usual formal inquiries delivered from safe distances, representatives were engaging in something approaching emotional dialogue. Sarah watched in fascination as beings throughout the chamber began to respond not just to the twins' words, but to the feelings accompanying them. A crystalline Zephyrian representative rose first, its translucent form chiming softly as it spoke. Ambassador Keth, Ambassador Vera, we must ask, if your people cannot control these emotional broadcasts, how would potential host worlds manage large-scale Centauri populations? The question carried an undertone of genuine concern rather than rejection, and Sarah could sense through her suit that both twins responded to the shift with cautious optimism. Their combined scent was becoming less overwhelming and more nuanced, she realized. Complex rather than simply intense. Vera stepped forward to respond, and Sarah noticed something remarkable happening. The Zephyrian representative was leaning forward slightly, apparently becoming more comfortable with their presence rather than less. An excellent question, honored representative. Our people have developed sophisticated techniques for modulating our emotional broadcasts when necessary. The overwhelming intensity you experience now is partly due to our anxiety about this presentation. In calmer circumstances, our communication is far more manageable. As if to demonstrate, both twins visibly composed themselves, and Sarah felt the atmospheric tension in the chamber decrease noticeably. The scent remained present, but became less aggressive, more like an intricate perfume than an assault on the senses. Additionally, Keth added, our people naturally separate into smaller communities for exactly this reason. Large gatherings of Centauri require careful management to prevent emotional overflow. We have thousands of years of experience in creating livable environments for ourselves. A massive Threnodai delegate spoke next, its 6 legs shifting as it addressed the platform. The hegemony of stone has 13 worlds with low atmospheric density and minimal native populations. However, we are concerned about the impact of your presence on our mining operations. Our workers must be able to function efficiently. Sarah realized that the delegate was not rejecting the possibility. It was exploring practical solutions. The emotional honesty of the Centauri presentation was encouraging genuine problem-solving rather than simple avoidance. We would never ask to be placed where our presence would disrupt existing populations or operations, Vera replied. And her emotional signature carried such sincere gratitude that several representatives throughout the chamber visibly relaxed. Our people are skilled in atmospheric engineering and environmental adaptation. We could contribute significantly to planetary development rather than merely occupying space. That was when Sarah noticed something that made her scientific mind race with possibilities. The longer the conversation continued, the more comfortable the chamber was becoming with the twins' presence. Representatives who had initially activated emergency breathing systems were now speaking naturally. Some had even deactivated their atmospheric shields entirely. She realized that exposure to Centauri emotional communication was creating a form of adaptation. The representatives were learning to process the chemical signals as information rather than assault. They were becoming, in essence, participants in the twins' communication system rather than victims of it. A Corellan delegate bounded to its feet, fur bright with excitement. The Democratic Federation has been monitoring this presentation with great interest. We have been searching for methods to improve diplomatic honesty and transparency. Your people's natural inability to conceal emotions could revolutionize interspecies relations. The statement sent a wave of surprise through the chamber, and Sarah could smell the twins' astonishment. In their 3 years of diplomatic attempts, no one had ever suggested that their condition might be an asset rather than a liability. You would welcome our presence? Keth asked carefully, his emotional signature broadcasting disbelief so pure that several representatives actually smiled in response. The Federation has struggled with trade negotiations where partners attempt to conceal their true positions, the Corellan explained. Having diplomatic partners who cannot lie about their feelings would be incredibly valuable. We would be honored to explore colony arrangements with your people. Sarah felt a shift in the entire chamber as other representatives began to reconsider the situation. What had started as a request for emergency evacuation assistance was transforming into something entirely different, a negotiation for mutually beneficial relationships. An Eridani delegate glided forward, silver robes flowing like liquid metal. The Contemplative Union has long sought to deepen emotional understanding between species. Your people could serve as emotional interpreters, helping us understand the true feelings underlying diplomatic exchanges. We have 7 peaceful worlds that would benefit from such wisdom. The Azure Collective has been monitoring this session with increasing interest, announced a representative whose species Sarah didn't recognize. Our people communicate primarily through bioluminescent displays. The idea of chemical emotional communication fascinates us. We would like to explore the possibility of establishing cultural exchange programs. The flood of offers was overwhelming, and Sarah could smell the twins' emotions cycling rapidly between joy, disbelief, and something approaching euphoria. After 3 years of rejection, they were suddenly facing more opportunities than they could process. But Sarah also sensed something else in their chemical signatures, a deep concern that this sudden acceptance might be too good to be true. Their experience had taught them to be wary of promises that might evaporate once the initial enthusiasm wore off. That was when she realized her real contribution to this historic moment. She stepped forward and activated her translator link again. Honored representatives, she said, I want to address something that I believe is crucial for moving forward. Over the past day, I have spent more time in direct contact with the Centauri than any non-Centauri being in recorded history. I want to share what I have learned about the practical realities of coexistence. The chamber fell silent, and Sarah could feel the intensity of attention from every direction. She was about to provide testimony that could determine the fate of an entire species. First, adaptation is possible, she began. While initial exposure to Centauri emotional communication is overwhelming, extended contact allows for adjustment and even understanding. What seems like sensory assault at first can become a rich source of emotional information. She gestured toward her specially modified suit. Human technology has already begun developing interfaces that can mediate Centauri communication, making extended interaction manageable while preserving the emotional content that makes their people unique. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. More importantly, I have discovered that humans can learn to interpret Centauri emotional broadcasts with remarkable accuracy. We may be uniquely suited to serve as intermediaries, helping other species understand and benefit from Centauri emotional honesty. A murmur went through the chamber as representatives began to grasp the implications. Sarah was proposing not just tolerance of the Centauri, but active partnership in developing new forms of interspecies communication. Dr. Chun called an ethereal representative, its gaseous form shifting colors as it spoke. Are you suggesting that humanity could serve as cultural bridges between the Centauri and other species? I'm suggesting that this crisis could become an opportunity for unprecedented advancement in interspecies understanding, Sarah replied. The Centauri need homes for their people. The galactic community needs better methods for achieving diplomatic honesty. Humanity could help facilitate both goals. Vera stepped forward, her emotional signature now carrying waves of hope so intense that Sarah could taste them even through her filtered suit. Dr. Chin speaks of possibilities we had never dared to imagine. Our people have always believed that our communication was a burden to be endured rather than a gift to be shared. We offered to work with any species willing to explore the 2 years after the historic Galactic Council session. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching the most remarkable diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Below her, representatives from 47 species worked together in an environment that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. The revolution had exceeded everyone's expectations. What had started as an emergency evacuation for the Centauri had become the foundation for an entirely new approach to interspecies relations. The Human-Centauri Cultural Bridge Initiative had transformed from a desperate experiment into one of the most successful diplomatic innovations in recorded history. Marcus Webb joined her at the viewing port, carrying a data tablet filled with the latest reports. The Andorian trade negotiations concluded successfully this morning, he said, his voice filled with the satisfaction of work well done. Both parties reported that the emotional transparency protocols prevented the usual 3 months of posturing and hidden agendas. They reached agreement in 6 days. Sarah smiled as she watched a group of human interpreters working with Centauri partners to facilitate a complex discussion between crystalline Zephyrians and the Azure Collective. The scene below looked like controlled chaos, but she knew it was actually the most efficient diplomatic process ever developed. Any word from the new colonies? She asked. All 7 Centauri settlements are exceeding development projections, Marcus replied. The Threnody mining operation on Kepler 442b reports that Centauri emotional engineering has improved worker satisfaction by 300%. They're actually requesting additional Centauri consultants. Sarah shook her head in amazement. The beings who had once been universally avoided were now among the most sought-after consultants in the galaxy. Their ability to provide honest emotional feedback was revolutionizing everything from workplace dynamics to trade negotiations. The transformation had not been without challenges. The first few months had involved countless technical difficulties as humans learned to serve as emotional interpreters while maintaining their own psychological stability. Sarah herself had spent weeks in medical observation as researchers studied the long-term effects of extended exposure to Centauri communication. What they had discovered was remarkable. Humans who worked regularly with the Centauri developed enhanced emotional intelligence and improved ability to read the feelings of other species. The constant exposure to authentic emotional communication was actually improving human diplomatic abilities across the board. Dr. Chun, a familiar voice called from behind her. Sarah turned to see Vera approaching, accompanied by 3 younger Centauri wearing the distinctive blue robes of diplomatic trainees. In the 2 years since their first meeting, Vera had become not just a colleague, but a close friend. More remarkably, Sarah had developed the ability to understand much of her emotional communication without technological assistance. Vera, Sarah greeted her warmly. How did the morning session go? Beyond our hopes, Vera replied, her emotional signature carrying waves of satisfaction and joy that Sarah could detect even without her specialized equipment. The Eridani delegation has formally requested a permanent Centauri cultural advisor. They believe our emotional transparency will help them resolve internal conflicts that have persisted for decades. The three young trainees moved nervously behind their instructor, and Sarah could smell their mixture of excitement and anxiety. They were part of the first generation of Centauri to grow up with the possibility of meaningful contact with other species, and they approached interspecies communication with an enthusiasm their elders had never been able to imagine. Dr. Chun, one of the trainees, said shyly, "We wanted to thank you for making our dreams possible. Because of your work, we can imagine futures our parents never could." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the emotional response that had become common when she contemplated how close the galaxy had come to losing everything the Centauri had to offer. "Your people's courage made it possible," she replied. Keth and Vera took incredible risks when they chose to trust humanity. Speaking of Keth, Vera said, her colors shifting to brighter patterns, "He wanted me to give you the latest updates from Aromia Prime. The evacuation is proceeding ahead of schedule, and the new atmospheric processors on Kepler 442b are working perfectly. Your design modifications are allowing for seamless integration of Centauri emotional engineering." Sarah nodded, though her attention was caught by movement in the diplomatic chamber below. A new group was entering, beings she didn't recognize, accompanied by a human interpreter team. It was becoming common for species to request human mediation specifically because of their partnership with the Centauri. "New first contact?" she asked Marcus. "The Whisper Collective," he replied, checking his tablet. "They communicate through subsonic vibrations that most species can't even detect. They've been observing galactic society for centuries, but never participating because they assumed no one could understand them. Until they heard about the human Centauri protocols," Vera added with obvious pride. "They specifically requested our assistance because they believe our approach to bridging communication gaps might work for subsonic interaction as well." Sarah watched as the human team began working with their Centauri partners to establish communication with the new species. It was a scene that had become routine at Harmony Station, but she never tired of witnessing the moment when understanding first formed between species that had previously seemed incompatible. The success of the initiative had surprised everyone, including its creators. The combination of human adaptability and Centauri emotional honesty had created something greater than the sum of its parts. Other species were beginning to request similar partnership programs, leading to innovations in interspecies communication that no one had thought possible. Dr. Chun, one of the young trainees, asked, "Do you think other species will develop the same tolerance for our communication that humans have?" It was a thoughtful question that went to the heart of what made humans unique in galactic society. Sarah had spent considerable time pondering the same issue as the initiative expanded. "I think humans have certain advantages," she said carefully. "We're adaptable, we're curious about things that make others uncomfortable, and we have a tendency to see opportunities where others see obstacles. But, more importantly, we don't give up easily when something interests us." "What Dr. Chun is diplomatically avoiding saying," Marcus added with a grin, "is that humans are stubborn enough to keep trying when everyone else declares something impossible." Vera's emotional signature carried warm amusement. "Stubbornness combined with empathy is perhaps the most valuable trait in the galaxy," she observed. "Your people's refusal to accept that communication barriers are permanent has changed everything for us." A soft chime indicated that the afternoon sessions were beginning, and Sarah could see the diplomatic chamber below becoming more active. The Whisper Collective first contact was scheduled for the main session, and she wanted to observe the process. "Are you planning to monitor the Whisper sessions?" Vera asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Sarah replied. "Every new species we successfully integrate teaches us something about the limits of communication and how to push past them." As they walked toward the observation gallery, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first encounter on Nexus Station. The twins who had once cleared rooms simply by entering them were now among the most respected diplomatic figures in the galaxy. The species facing extinction had become leaders in emotional engineering and interpersonal communication. More importantly, the success of the initiative had demonstrated something crucial about the nature of difference and acceptance in galactic society. What seemed like insurmountable barriers often turned out to be opportunities for innovation and growth. The key was finding species willing to look past surface difficulties to discover deeper possibilities. Dr. Chun, Vera said as they reached the gallery, I have been meaning to ask you something. Do you ever regret that first decision to approach us despite the complications? Sarah looked down at the bustling diplomatic center, where dozens of species worked together with an efficiency and honesty that had been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. She could smell Vera's genuine curiosity mixed with deep gratitude, and she realized that she had become so accustomed to Centauri emotional communication that she barely noticed it anymore. Regret it. Sarah smiled. Vera, that was the best decision I ever made. Your people didn't just need saving. They needed to be valued for what they could contribute. And humanity needed to learn that our gift isn't just solving problems. It's recognizing that what looks like a problem might actually be a solution waiting for the right perspective. The afternoon session began with the Whisper Collective delegation taking their positions in the specially modified communication chamber. Sarah watched as human and Centauri teams worked together to establish contact with beings who had been silent observers for centuries. As the first successful communication links formed between subsonic vibrations and chemical emotions, translated through human interpretation, Sarah felt the same sense of wonder she had experienced during that first conversation with Keth and Vera. Once again, beings who had thought communication impossible were discovering that difference was not division, it was diversity. The galaxy was becoming a more connected place, one breakthrough at a time. And at the heart of each success was the same principle that had started it all. Sometimes the most valuable trait any species can possess is the willingness to step toward what everyone else is running away from. In the years that followed, the Human Centauri Cultural Bridge Initiative would facilitate first contact with dozens of previously isolated species, revolutionize diplomatic protocols throughout the galaxy, and establish new standards for interspecies cooperation. But Sarah would always remember that it all started with a simple decision to introduce herself to two lonely beings that everyone else was afraid to approach. The twins who had once been avoided for their smell had become the foundation for the most inclusive diplomatic revolution in galactic history. And humanity had once again proven that their greatest strength was not their technology or their intelligence, but their inexplicable willingness to find friendship in the most unlikely places. SE possibilities, Keth added, not as refugees seeking charity, but as partners contributing unique abilities to the galactic community. The transformation in the chamber was remarkable. What had begun as an emergency evacuation request had evolved into negotiations for cultural exchange, technological development, and diplomatic innovation. The Centauri had gone from being a problem to be solved to being a resource to be valued. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, the birth of a new form of communication that could revolutionize interspecies relations. And at the center of it all was humanity's peculiar gift for seeing opportunity in what others perceived as obstacles. The formal session was drawing to a close, but Sarah could sense that the real work was just beginning. Multiple species were already requesting private meetings to discuss specific arrangements. The twins' emotional broadcasts were now carrying such intense joy and relief that the entire chamber felt lighter, more optimistic. As they prepared to leave the platform, Keth turned to Sarah with an expression of profound gratitude. Dr. Chun, you have given our people something more precious than sanctuary. You have given us hope for a future we never thought possible. You've given us something too, Sarah replied. You've shown us that difference doesn't have to mean division. Sometimes it means evolution. She was about to discover that the consequences of this historic session would reach far beyond saving one species, and that humanity was about to play a role in galactic society that no one could have predicted. What you perceive as an unpleasant odor is actually a complex form of communication, Sarah explained. The Centauri do not simply speak words. They share emotions, memories, and genuine feelings through chemical signals. Right now, you are not just hearing their request for aid. You are experiencing their desperation, their love for their people, and their hope for survival. She paused, watching as understanding began to dawn on faces throughout the chamber. When Keth speaks of planetary destruction, you smell the genuine grief of someone watching his homeworld die. When Vera presents evacuation plans, you experience the fierce determination of someone who will do anything to save her people. This is not diplomatic theater. This is the most honest presentation any species has ever given to this council. The chamber was completely silent now, and Sarah realized that she had the undivided attention of every representative present. More importantly, she could sense through her suit's sensors that the twins' emotional broadcasts were shifting towards something lighter, more hopeful. The question before you is not just whether to provide aid to the Centauri, Sarah continued. The question is whether this council is ready to move beyond surface diplomacy toward genuine emotional understanding between species. The Centauri offer you something no other species can: complete honesty. They cannot lie about their feelings or hide their true intentions. When they say they need help, you can literally smell the authenticity of their desperation. Keth stepped forward, his skin now showing brighter patterns that Sarah had learned indicated rising hope. Dr. Chen speaks truth. Our people have never learned to deceive through scent. It is impossible for us to broadcast false emotions. What you experience from us is exactly what we feel, nothing more and nothing less. We understand that our presence is challenging, Vera added, her own patterns shifting to warm golds and soft purples. But we believe that challenge might also be a gift. In a galaxy where diplomatic words often mask true intentions, we offer complete emotional transparency. We can be trusted because we cannot hide our real feelings. Sarah watched as the implications rippled through the assembled representatives. They were looking at a species that could not lie, could not hide their true motivations, and could not present false diplomatic faces. For a governing body that dealt constantly with hidden agendas and political maneuvering, the Centauri represented something revolutionary. She was about to discover that humanity's gift for reading emotions would prove even more valuable than anyone had imagined, and that the galaxy was about to witness the birth of an entirely new form of interspecies communication. But first, she had to help the council understand that what they were experiencing was not an assault on their senses. It was an invitation to the most honest diplomatic relationship in galactic history. Unless, Sarah said slowly, an idea beginning to form. What if you didn't have to do it alone? Both twins turned toward her with sudden attention. What do you mean? Keth asked. Sarah was thinking out loud, pieces of a plan starting to come together. What if a human were to stand with you? Someone who could tolerate your presence and translate your emotional communications into terms the council could understand? Someone who could serve as a bridge between your chemical language and their need for traditional diplomacy. The laboratory fell completely silent. Sarah could feel the intensity of the twins' attention even through her protective suit. She was proposing something that had never been attempted, a three-way diplomatic presentation where one species would serve as interpreter for another's emotional communications. Dr. Chen, Vera said carefully, are you suggesting that you would be willing to share the platform with us tomorrow? To stand in our presence before the entire Galactic Council? I'm suggesting that humanity might be uniquely suited to help your people, Sarah replied. And I think it's time we found out just how much discomfort humans are willing to endure in the service of justice. She was about to volunteer for what might be the most challenging diplomatic mission in galactic history. She was also about to discover that some humans could do more than just tolerate the Centauri presence. They could actually learn to understand it. To say, though each word was an effort. But I admit I will need some form of breathing apparatus to continue this conversation. Keth and Vera exchanged another look, this one filled with something Sarah had not expected to see. Hope. Dr. Chen, Keth said carefully, are you saying that you wish to spend more time in our presence, despite the obvious difficulties? I am saying that I believe there is much more to your people than anyone has taken the time to discover. And as a scientist, I find mysteries irresistible. It was a simple statement that would reshape the destiny of two species and demonstrate once again why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most unpredictable problem solvers. While everyone else ran from what they did not understand, humans had an almost pathological tendency to run directly toward it. Sarah Chun did not yet know that she was about to uncover one of the greatest secrets in the galaxy. She did not know that the overwhelming scent that cleared rooms and emptied corridors was actually the key to humanity's next great contribution to galactic civilization. All she knew was that two beings stood before her, isolated and rejected, and that every scientific instinct she possessed told her their story was worth discovering. The first meeting between humanity and the Centauri twins had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.